Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes now to the distinguished gentlelady from the state of Washington, Ms. Jayapal.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we are, once again, with my Republican colleagues bringing a bill to the floor that does absolutely nothing to address the needs of the American people. My Republican colleagues made lots of campaign promises to lower costs for everyday Americans, but not a single bill so far has done anything like that. Instead, this week appears to be a week where they say they are protecting women, and yet their actions tell a different story. Today, we're discussing a bill that takes the Violence Against Women Act, a bill meant to protect victims of domestic violence, and weaponizes it against, you've got it, domestic violence victims. That is exactly why 200 local and national advocacy organizations for survivors of domestic violence from across the country with deep expertise in this area have come out so strongly to oppose this bill. I'm talking about the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and groups that serve domestic violence survivors in more than 40 states across the country. Now, I want to be very clear once again. In our current laws, those who are convicted or admit to domestic violence or crimes listed in this bill are already deportable and inadmissible to the country. There is actually no gap in the law that needs to be fixed. Instead, in a perverse move, this bill would make it easier to label survivors of domestic violence as perpetrators, to make them removable from the country and eliminate existing legal safeguards that protect survivors. This is once again a bill that widens the highway to Donald Trump's mass deportation plans. I want to talk through an example. The police show up to a domestic violence call. The victim was attacked by her abuser, and she fought back in self-defense. Maybe the abuser has some scratches on his face. It is common practice for the police to arrest both parties in that situation when responding to a domestic violence incident. The police write a report describing how the victim hit her abuser in self-defense. Under this bill, that is an admission constituting the elements of domestic violence, and this woman is now inadmissible and subject to deportation, even if she is never charged, even if a judge later rules that she did not commit any crime. That so-called admission in the police report that she responded in self-defense to hit her abuser, that is enough to make her inadmissible under this bill. And that is, again, why more than 200 advocacy organizations for domestic violence survivors, deeply ensconced in the material of what happens every day across the country, far too often, those groups are all deeply opposed to this legislation. They know that this expansive bill that eliminates the existing safeguards for domestic violence survivors will harm those exact survivors and create a chilling effect for reporting future crimes, empowering abusers to go after immigrant women and children. Right now, we're only talking about immigrant survivors, but is this bill the start of a dangerous road watering down protections for all victims of domestic violence that are across the country? Who is next? The Violence Against Women Act is a landmark piece of legislation, a testament to a time when Democrats and Republicans could actually come together and legislate on issues of fundamental importance to this nation, despite our differences. The initial iteration of VAWA passed the House by voice vote. Can you imagine that? It passed by voice vote. It reshaped how we as a country talk about gender-based violence and how we treat survivors. The Violence Against Women Act recognized that we cannot be serious about eliminating violence against women if we are not equally serious about eradicating violence against everyone, regardless of immigration status. There are so many reasons why individuals in domestic violence situations are unjustly forced into the criminal legal system. We've seen the data. Too often, survivors are arrested alongside their abuser, and they're charged and even convicted of crimes involving violence, which later prove to be in self-defense or unjustly charged. This bill makes it more likely that we harm the very people we want to protect. One more minute.
I grant the gentlelady an extra minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Here's the cruel irony. In the same week that Republicans are putting forth the nomination of a defense secretary who won't even say that sexual assault is disqualifying, Republicans want to fool you into thinking that they care about domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. Please. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Despite VAWA's bipartisan history, we now have to fight tooth and nail to reauthorize it. It was Republicans who let the Violence Against Women Act languish and expire for 3 years. And the leader of the Republican Party is once again a man who was found liable for sexual misconduct and bragged about grabbing and forcibly kissing women without their consent. Last year, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of VAWA's enactment. But today, we have to watch our colleagues across the aisle make another cheap attempt to divide us and play gotcha politics. We should be working together to eradicate domestic violence. I have a bill, the WISE Act, that would strengthen protections for survivors. I wish we could do that here, not this harmful, misleading bill. I urge my colleagues to oppose, and Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from over 200 local and national domestic violence organizations who oppose this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.